It was Saturday night on August 2nd, 2014. Laurel, Montana police received a 911 call at 11:48 p.m. The caller reported her neighbor had cut a man's throat and that the man was dying at the 700 block of East 1st Street in Laurel. When Officer Johnson arrived on the scene, he found a man lying on the ground in a puddle of blood, his legs draped over an overturned bench near a picnic table. He had a deep laceration on his right cheek, and his throat had been slashed from ear to ear. 63-year-old William Earl Cunningham, affectionately known to their neighbors as Buddy, was leaning up against his silver Buick sedan when police arrived. "I cut him. He's dead. The knife's on the table," said Cunningham, pointing to a bloody folding knife. 40-year-old Nathan Horn was declared dead an hour after the arrival of Officer Johnson. Cunningham said that they had been drinking and were continuing an argument from the previous night about which U.S. military service was better, the Marine Corps or the Army. During the heated debate, Cunningham claims that Horn took a swing at him and his Army training took over. He instinctively reacted by slashing at Horn's throat and face. A neighbor recalls Cunningham goading Horn into hitting him, saying, "Hit me!" After that, Cunningham was standing over Horn as he was bleeding out, gasping hopelessly for air. Cunningham, aka Buddy, had an incredibly serious criminal record, according to Yellowstone County District Court Judge Mary Jane Neasley. In fact, this wasn't the first time he had gotten himself into a drunken knife fight. During this altercation, he had a blood alcohol content of 0.217, more than twice the legal driving limit of 0.08. Cunningham is himself an Army veteran. He joined the service around 19 years old towards the end of the Vietnam War in January 1971. He enlisted as a 51 Bravo carpenter/masonry specialist. He was airborne qualified. He received the National Defense Service Medal for enlisting during a time of war, and a Good Conduct Medal for going 3 years without serious misconduct. He was qualified a marksman with his rifle, the lowest of the passing qualifications. While he is a Vietnam era veteran, he never left the United States during his military service. Links to Cunningham's military records will be available in the description of this podcast. His military service records are a bit difficult to read. It appears that he was with the 22nd Engineer Battalion at Fort Bragg, which is part of the 82nd Airborne Division. He was honorably discharged 3 years later in 1973. This was a hard time to find work since the U.S. was in the middle of a recession. Between 1973 and 1975, unemployment was at an all-time high, and there was a high rate of inflation. It is likely that he struggled to find work. Before the end of that year, he had re-enlisted back into the Army and served as a carpenter and a light vehicle driver. He served with the 864th Engineer Battalion in the Headquarters Company, located in San Francisco, on his second enlistment. He had received another honorable discharge at the rank of Specialist 4, an equivalent rank to the modern-day E4 Specialist. On his second enlistment, he was separated from the Army 3 years and 5 months into his 4-year contract. It isn't clear why he was separated from the service. I do know that there was no attempt at a reduction in force at the time, which would have allowed early separation. Cunningham is receiving disability payment from the Army, so he may have been separated due to an injury. His lawyer referred to him as a disabled veteran. Although in Montana, a disabled veteran is anyone with any service-connected issue as long as they receive some compensation for it. He began his criminal career around the end of his military career. He was convicted of felony assault with a deadly weapon and willful child cruelty. In 1983, he had received another felony for being a felon in the possession of a firearm. He left California and continued his criminal shenanigans around 1996 in Yellowstone County, Montana. He received multiple felonies for possessing methamphetamines and forgery in 1999. He celebrated the new millennium in jail. In late January of 2000, he was granted a 5-year suspended sentence as part of a plea deal. By March 13, 2000, he had violated the terms of his release. Probation officers discovered that he had been drinking alcohol and was found with a hunting knife in his vehicle. He went back to jail and wasn't released again until July 20th of that year. 12 days after being released, he was involved in a disturbance at a private residence at 2101 Santiago Boulevard. He fled the scene and was located in his vehicle in a Burger King parking lot less than 2 miles away. He was required to take a urinalysis in which he pissed hot, testing positive for meth and marijuana. When Yellowstone County Sheriff's deputies searched his car, they found a half-drunk 24-ounce tall boy of Ice House, a full can of Miller beer, an unloaded .38 Special pistol, 3 knives, an aluminum baseball bat that was shortened into a bludgeon, a bag containing $110,000 in stolen savings bonds, an undetermined amount of gold coins, and 6 grams of marijuana. His blood alcohol content was 108, over the legal limit for driving. He served his remaining prison sentence and was released in September 21st of 2004. He was busted for writing bad checks and driving with a revoked license in 2006. He caught another DUI in 2009. Nathan Horn, the victim of Cunningham's most recent crime, also had a criminal history and was designated a violent offender. Even though the argument between Cunningham and Horn was about which military service was better, the Marines or the Army, Horn had never served in the military and wasn't actually a Marine. He spent his 20s committing crime in and outside prison. He had numerous arrests in several Montana counties. By 1994, he was in state prison. In May 2008, he was convicted of assaulting his girlfriend, which he had been convicted of on 3 prior occasions. Apparently, they were at a town pump convenience store, and they were so drunk the attendant refused to sell them alcohol. They left and returned 15 minutes later, starting a ruckus. While the attendant was on the phone with the police, Horn slapped his girlfriend across the face. When released on bail, he fled the state to Alaska, where he was arrested in 2009. He served 2 more years in prison. He was murdered by Cunningham August 2, 2014, during their drunken debate between who's better, the Marines or the Army.
Horn's mother, Anna Horn, says, "He's everything a son could be to a mother. That's what I miss." If the parents of Nathan Horn had to describe their son in one word, it would be caring. "Nathan had a good heart," said his mother. She lives in Hart Butte with Glenn Horn, her husband of 41 years. She described listening to the sometimes graphic testimony and the mention of Horn's criminal activity as being difficult. She knew he had a substance abuse problem. He had tried repeatedly to quit using drugs during court-ordered treatment programs. Horn was born in Browning, Montana, to Mary Horn. Anna and Glenn Horn, his aunt and uncle, got legal custody of Nathan when he was 2. They raised him as their son alongside their 3 children. Nathan Horn had 2 children himself, one with a girlfriend when he was a teenager and another 10 years later with his wife. It appears she is no longer in the picture because at the time of his death, she wasn't listed as a family member in the obituary. "He had big dreams," said Glenn Horn. Glenn recalls taking a young Nathan Horn for rides around the Blackfeet Reservation where he was the game warden. "He'd just talk about how he wanted to be a good hunter and a good fisherman," he says. As a kid, he supported his sister by running track with her, even though he preferred baseball or basketball. He was particularly kind to his brother, who has Down syndrome. At the time of his death, he was working 2 jobs, Burger King and Advanced Auto Parts. He was getting prepared to complete his high school education that he had abandoned at the age of 16. He seemed to have a pretty clear path forward. He was going to get his GED and become a truck driver. Ann Horn expressed confusion about the argument that ended with the death of her son. "I don't know where the argument came from. Nathan was never in the military," she says. She has an uncle who was in the Marines that Horn was close to, but Glenn Horn's siblings served in the Navy, Air Force, and Army. As early as 2001, Nathan Horn had made claims that he was a jarhead, a derisive term of endearment for a Marine. He writes on his Facebook, "Good gosh, this is effing impossible for a jarhead roughneck like me. Anybody know how to get my MySpace pics over to my Facebook?" He was careful to not actually use profanity, instead replacing them with a series of Grolexes. You know, the little typographical symbols used instead of actual bad words in cartoon speech bubbles. After all, he was very close with his adoptive mother and father, and they were his friends on Facebook. It isn't terribly uncommon for people seeking validation or clout to pose as service members, especially with the prestige that comes along with being a Marine. Claiming to be a Marine would also help him explain where he was while he was serving prison time in Alaska. He would post announcements to his friends and loved ones on his Facebook page, wishing them happy and productive days before he goes to work himself. He shares pictures of himself with his smiling son, Nathan Horn Jr. Nathan's father, a rough cowboy type that chewed Copenhagen and wore Stetsons, never smiled in his photos.
The intersection of Idaho and East 1st Street was closed off late into Sunday night. Paramedics pronounced Horn dead at the scene. Cunningham was read his rights and agreed to speak with police interrogators without a lawyer present. He stuck to his story that he was being attacked and in fear for his life. Cunningham, age 63 at the time, claimed he was afraid of Horn, who was 23 years younger and nearly twice his size. Cunningham was a disabled veteran and had been in and out of the hospital. Cunningham's neighbor recalls how kind Buddy was and how charitable he would be to complete strangers. She acknowledges that he has a drinking problem, but he wouldn't hurt someone unless it was in self-defense. She also claims that Buddy was in very poor health. Cunningham was held on a $500,000 bail. His lawyer announced that they intended to plead not guilty by means of self-defense. The trial was short, lasting less than a week. Members of Horn's family testified. Dr. Thomas Bennett was called by the state to provide his expert opinion. During the trial, the judge did not allow Cunningham to question the professional history and credibility of the state's witness. The judge was not impressed with his claims of self-defense and convicted him of deliberate homicide of Nathan Horn. The judge sentenced Cunningham to 80 years in prison. 5 months after his conviction, he appealed for a new trial. The Montana Supreme Court later determined Cunningham was wrongfully denied his right to fully explain why he was afraid of Horn and questioned the credibility of the state's expert. The Montana Supreme Court granted him a retrial in 2018. During the second trial, Cunningham changed his claim from self-defense to accidental homicide, claiming he didn't intentionally slash or stab Horn. The autopsy results show multiple stab and slash wounds to Horn's face and neck. Defense attorney Benjamin Darrow asked for 40 years in prison with 20 suspended, which would have made Cunningham immediately eligible for parole. Cunningham didn't take the stand at the second trial, and Dr. Thomas Bennett, the witness in question, was not called. The state medical examiner, Dr. Robert Kurtzman, testified at the trial that the fatal wound was not accidental. He said the 6-inch gash across the front and side of Horn's throat was created from 2 different knife strokes. He noted multiple knife puncture wounds to one of Horn's cheeks and a deeper laceration on the other. "Well, the jury certainly didn't believe it was accidental," said Yellowstone County District Judge Gregory Todd. "I don't believe it was accidental, and I don't believe Mr. Cunningham has done enough time," he continued. A pre-sentence investigator who compiles a report on criminal history and other factors for the judge to consider had asked Cunningham what he thought the penalty should be. Cunningham responded, "I believe it was an accident. I have done enough time." Cunningham retreated back to the self-defense argument in a brief statement prior to sentencing. Quote, "I protected my life, but I can be and am accountable for the family's continued hurt." End quote. The judge sentenced Cunningham to 70 years on the deliberate homicide conviction and another 10 years for the use of a weapon. For a second time, Cunningham was convicted and sentenced to 80 years in prison for the killing of Horn. Cunningham is now 69 years old, and he will likely die in prison. It isn't clear how much his Veteran Affairs disability pension was prior to his conviction. Incarcerated veterans' disability pay is limited to a maximum of 10% disability pay, which is about $142 monthly at the time of this recording. If he was receiving 10% disability already, then it would be cut in half to $71 a month. There's been a long-standing and good-natured rivalry between the various branches of the military. Members of the various branches are all brothers and sisters in arms. There's no need for anyone to resort to violence in the defense of the good name of their chosen branch. Cunningham and Horn's argument, unfortunately, did not definitively establish which branch of service is better. I hope you enjoyed this podcast. Please like and subscribe to the channel if you'd like more content. Let me know in the comment section below which branch of the military you think is best and why you think it's the Army.